Hi, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Greenaway. I hope you're all doing well. I know I really miss you guys and I really miss reading to you. So I came up with this idea of doing kind of like a pre recorded video, reading you a book of that I choose. And in a few minutes, I will be sharing the story of The Adventures of Sophie Mouse, a New Friend. This is a new series that I've gotten in the library. And this is the first book, so I'm hoping to read a couple chapters with you. And when we're done with that today, you can always replay the video without sound and read it on your own. So we'll see how far we get with this. Today I plan on doing just 2 or 3 chapters, depending on the time. Remember, though, you should be reading every day for 30 minutes, uninterrupted. Find a quiet spot, get something to read, and just sit quietly and read for 30 minutes. Time yourself. Write down when you read once a week. Document when you read. And then hopefully we can share that together when we all are back together. So we're going to start with The Adventures of Sophie Mouse, a New Friend. Chapter 1. Spring has sprung. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Outside the mouse family's cottage, a bumblebee zipped from flower to flower. Sitting at her easel in the sunshine, Sophie Mouse put down her paintbrush. Her eyes followed the bee. Oh, to be able to fly, she thought. I could see every inch of Silver Lake Forest, maybe even to the other side of Forget-Me-Not Lake. I wonder how fast a bee flies when he really gets going. What would it be like to fly to the schoolhouse for the first day of school tomorrow? What would... Sophie? Sophie! Her father's voice called out, snapping her out of her daydream. He was in the doorway of their cottage, which was nestled in between the roots of an oak tree. Are you done with your chores? George Mouse asked. When are you? When you are, you can go see Mom at the bakery. She's making nutmeg popovers today. Sophie's little nose twitched. She was sure she could already smell the sweet scent. Nutmeg popovers were one of her mother's specialties. At her bakery in Pine Needle Grove, Lily Mouse surely would have started making the batter at dawn, before Sophie was even awake. Sophie hated to stop painting. It was the first spring day, warm enough to paint outside, but she had a little sweeping to do if she wanted to go to the bakery. Sophie hurried inside and found the willow twig broom. She had already swept the 3 small bedrooms upstairs. Just the main floor was left. Under the toadstool table, in birch brand stools, and around the spun silk couch. Sophie swept all the corners of the kitchen. Then she swept the pile of leaf bits and dust right out the front door. Dad, I'm finished, she called. I'm going to Hattie's house on the way to the bakery. Hattie Frog was Sophie's best friend. Just then, way back in the rear of the cottage, a mouse's head popped up through a hole in the floor. It was Sophie's little brother, Winston. He was cleaning up the root cellar. I want to come too, Winston called. Sophie sighed. Winston was 6. She had been stuck inside the cottage with him for most of the winter vacation. Now that the weather was warming up, he wanted to tag along with Sophie everywhere. Have you finished your chores? Mr. Mouse asked Sophie's brother. There was a long silence. When Winston answered, his voice was quiet. Not yet. Well, finish up then, Mr. Mouse replied. You and I can go later. Sophie leaned her broom against the wall by the front door. Then she was off with an extra spring in her step. It wasn't that Sophie didn't like her brother. They had fun playing together, but Sophie was 2 years older, and it was the very last day of vacation. She wanted to fill it with 8-year-old adventures. Halfway to the stream, Sophie heard a rustle in the tall reeds to her right. She stopped in her tracks. Hello, is someone there? Sophie called out. She perked up her ears, listening carefully, but all was silent and still. Sophie's eyes scanned the reeds. She thought she could just make out a shadowy shape among them. She squinted and took a step closer. Now Sophie was sure. Someone was in there, but who was it? Chapter 2. A Perfect Day. "Harriet Frog," Sophie called using Hattie's full name. "Is that you in there?" There was no answer from the reeds, so Sophie called again. "It's me, Sophie." There was a rustle. The reeds parted slowly. A green eye peeked out. Then Hattie hopped out into the open. "Whew, it is you," Hattie said. "I heard footsteps coming, and, well, I'm glad it's you." Hattie was shy around strangers, but not with Sophie. They had known each other for as long as they could remember. Sophie told Hattie about the popovers. "Want to come to the bakery?" Sophie asked. "We could stop at the lake on the way." Hattie giggled and shook her head. Sophie, Forget-Me-Not Lake isn't exactly on the way." Hattie is always so practical, thought Sophie. But she was right. The lake was a bit of a hike. "Well," said Sophie, "we have lots of time, and it's our last day of vacation." Hattie smiled. "I'll tell my mom," she cried, then hopped off toward home. Sophie followed and waited outside Hattie's house. It was built on the bank of a stream, not far from Sophie's. Half the house sat floating on lily pads right on the water. The other half was built into the pebbly bank. Sophie knew that her dad, the town architect, had helped Mr. and Mrs. Frog design it. Soon Hattie was back, and she and Sophie were running off toward the lake. "Please be home before dark," Mrs. Frog called after them. The girls never got into too much trouble in Silver Lake Forest. Now and then, Sophie came home with prickers on her tail or muddy clothing. One time she got lost exploring a mole tunnel, but she just asked one of the moles for directions and soon found her way home. The path to Forget-Me-Not Lake was long, winding, and lined with berry bushes. "Oh, these make the best purple paint," Sophie exclaimed, pointing to some ripe berries. She stopped to gather some. Sophie carried pouches in her pockets at all times, for exactly this reason. Both the pouches and Sophie's pockets were always stained with berry juice. Finally, the girls arrived at Forget-Me-Not Lake. The water glittered in the morning sun. Sophie looked at Hattie. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" she asked. "Well," Hattie said with a smile, "you do have one wild imagination, Sophie Mouse. But if you're thinking we should go lily pad hopping, hop on." Sophie climbed onto Hattie's back and held on tight. Hattie leaped out onto the lake. She jumped from lily pad to lily pad, hopscotching across the water. This was their very favorite thing to do at the lake. Later, the girls made flower crowns. They looked for 4-leaf clovers. As usual, they didn't find any. They skipped stones on the water, counting the jumps. They played hide and seek. Then Sophie made stilts from sticks and tried to walk on them. When their tummies grumbled, it was time for popovers. The bell on the bakery door jingled as they entered. Mrs. Mouse was at the counter. Several animals were waiting patiently in line. Sophie and Hattie scurried behind the counter just as they always did. Lily Mouse took a moment to hug them. Then she whispered, "A fresh batch of popovers just came out. Help yourselves." The girls smiled gleefully and hurried back into the kitchen. As they nibbled their popovers, Sophie sighed happily. It was turning out to be a great last day of vacation. Already she was thinking about the picture she would paint about it. She'd be sure to use her new purple berry paint. Okay, I'm going to put a bookmark right here in Chapter 3, School Surprise, so that when we come together again next week, I will continue from there. So I hope you liked part of the story today. And once again, you can replay it at any time. Just turn the volume down and you can read it on your own. And remember to keep reading every day for 30 minutes uninterrupted. Stay safe, stay healthy, and enjoy this time with your family. I'll see you soon. Bye.